Okay, it's 1 o'clock and welcome to the regional town hall, our virtual town hall. First, I want to thank my executive board for attending with us. This is a great show of unity and obviously shows all of our membership the support that you have in your association. So our original plan was that we were going to go to all of the regions personally this year, and ultimately the pandemic has derailed a lot of our efforts, but having these meetings, specifically here, Region 5, our effort to communicate with you and to connect with all of you with very important information was vital for us, and that's the reason why we created the virtual town halls. I also want to recognize Mike Lunati and our professional staff for helping us through the pandemic. It's not over. Mike is still working tirelessly to ensure that there are lines of communication that are open with the governor's office and putting our profession, New York State Funeral Directors Association, on the forefront of those conversations and that dialogue. So thank you again, Mike, to you and your staff. And without further ado, I will turn this meeting over to Mike Lunati. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate the introduction and the kind words. We're happy to do our part to help you guys through anything that you're facing, including a pandemic. And as Bill said, we will stay on alert and make sure that we're communicating with all of you as we head into the fall and the winter. And since I have a captured audience, I will just let you all know we are planning to do a COVID update call on November 5th. So information is going to be out if it's not already on that. So please keep an eye out, and hopefully you'll be able to join us for a webinar to give you some updates and things to think about as we head into the fall and winter. So as Bill mentioned, today we're going to go through a town hall with you. I can see most of everybody is muted right now, so that's great. We have a small enough group, so if you don't mind staying on mute for the first part while we walk through a little bit of an overview, and then you can just unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. You also could raise your hand using the feature there. But we'll get into some of the ways to communicate as we get through this. Also, just so everybody knows, we are recording this town hall as well as all the town halls that we are conducting. And the last piece of, I guess, housekeeping is that we are scheduled for an hour, but we can go as long or as short as we need to. So again, as long as we're having a conversation about all of this, we have no time constraints on our end. So we're happy to continue to chat with you all. All right, so I'm now going to attempt to share my screen with all of you, so that, here we go. And I'm going to walk through, sorry about that. I didn't cue it up the right way. There we go. So what we want to do for the first part is we want to just walk through some information that we put together so we can have a way to have a conversation off of this. Before I jump into the overview, I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors who, through their generous support, have helped to underwrite the town halls that we're having last week and this week. So what we're going to do is we have two topics we want to discuss with you. One we're calling paraprofessionals. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail, and then also alcohol in funeral homes. We will go through a short overview through this PowerPoint, but the majority of our time is dedicated to allowing for an open discussion on these two topics. The goal for our meeting is to obtain member feedback. And I think it's important for all of you to know how we're going to go forward after we get the feedback. So we're going through having a meeting in each region. We started last week in Region 1, and we're working our way through to Region 9, which will be done as of Thursday afternoon. We will then consolidate all the feedback we've received and present it to the board for them to look at and discuss at their December board meetings. It's very important for you to all know that we have no desired outcomes, no defined next steps or plans as it relates to these two issues. We've taken no formal opinion on either issue that we're going to be discussing. Both of these, if they were to move forward at the very end of the day, would need a change in law to become reality. And it's important for you to know at this point in time, we have not researched or drafted any legislation on any of these issues, just to let you know where we are in the process. So to give you a sense of everything that's been talked about as it relates to the first topic, which is paraprofessionals, I wanted to go back to when the idea about this really started, and that was back in 2015 with a group which was this Funeral Service Education Task Force. Now, the conversation that the task force had back in 2015 wasn't necessarily about paraprofessionals. Paraprofessionals, though, is part of the subgroup of the larger issue of the funerals industry workforce, which did start back in 2015. So we're just going to walk through all these different pieces that got us to our member town halls today. So the task force started with a goal of strengthening and elevating funeral service now and for the future. The Funeral Service Education Task Force had certain focus areas, and you can see them there: residency, education and curriculum, which was in the mortuary science college programs, continuing education, and master certification. At the end of their 2-year work, they had several recommendations that they put forward. With regard to residency, their recommendation was to add a discernment period and to also have increased accountability and structure. Kind of as a side note, we are now in a position where after multiple conversations with different stakeholders, including the colleges, our members, the Bureau, we are now in a spot where we have drafted legislation that we are able to introduce when we're ready to into the state legislature to increase, or I should say, to enhance the residency process. With regard to education and curriculum, they had a recommendation for an entire new curriculum for the mortuary science programs. And then with the topics of continuing education and master certification, their recommendation was to have a new mandatory credentialing program and higher quality continuing education program review and approval regimen. So that was the focus of the Funeral Service Education Task Force. Then in 2018, the NYSFDA president at the time formed the 2020 Task Force, and their goal was to explore and implement new programs to ensure a bright future for funeral service in New York State. What this really wound up being was a group that in a lot of ways expanded on and continued the work of the task force, and then branched out to kind of extend the reach to more of what I call a holistic approach. So you can see the areas of focus there: recruitment, residency, professional development, mentors, and paraprofessionals. The residency and professional development pieces were areas, obviously, that we just mentioned the education task force worked on. So that's where that overlap or expansion comes from. And that holistic approach is really depicted in that circle graph that you see on the screen. The task force, the 2020 task force, took a look at the quality and quantity of the workforce. They went all the way to like the high school students, which is the pre-student piece. And they've put together, we put together and working on that issue, the whole funeral service education, the I Want to Be a Funeral Director campaign. And I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden on the other name for it, but it's the recruitment for folks who are in the schools, high schools, to become funeral directors. And that entire campaign has also allowed us to reach out to the counselors in the high schools to give them tools to give to students who might want to be funeral directors. So the goal through that is really to reach more students who might have an interest in funeral service and bring them into the mortuary science colleges. We already are working with students. We talked about the residency. So you can see it kind of goes all the way around to the retirees. So as it relates to the recommendations that this task force actually came out with, they had recommendations for moving forward in each of the focus areas. And their recommendation was simply to utilize a combination of work groups, task forces, and the Bridge Commission to address the different areas. As it relates to the paraprofessionals specifically, they recommended creating a task force to continue the work that they had already started. So they presented that to the board in June of 2019, but the board said that before we start creating new task force to move forward, we wanted additional member input first. And as Bill Villanova mentioned at the beginning of the town hall, the original plan was to gather that input during the 2020 regional meetings this spring. But as we all know, COVID has disrupted that plan and caused us to cancel the meetings, which are now replaced by these town halls. So I'm going to focus a little bit now, the rest of it, on the paraprofessional aspect and what the work group from the task force did as it relates to that area. So in arriving at the recommendations, the 2020 task force actually divided itself into work groups and took a deeper dive into each of the focus areas. The deep dive into the topic of paraprofessionals was done through a specific exercise, which I just want to share with you now. So what we wound up doing was presenting the group with an assumption scenario, and then we asked them to answer a specific question. So the assumption scenario was this: it would be said to assume that the state association had received notice from the State Department of Health that due to the extremely low numbers of licensed funeral directors, that the department had declared it a public health issue. And then also assume that the department was proposing a new license or certification be developed to address the workforce need in funeral service due to lack of licensed funeral directors, and their determination that addressing this issue through newly licensed funeral directors was not feasible. So we asked specifically, what would the ideal job description or responsibilities for this position look like? So that work group then started to dive into that. And the first step in answering that was exploring the question of why and coming up with the list of what should be addressed. To say that a little differently, they're looking at, based on the assumption scenario, why is there a lack of funeral directors and what needs to be accounted for when creating new positions? And the group's answers to those questions is here on the list that you see. So they came away with this list: to spark a career interest in funeral service, create a pool of qualified workers, protect families by ensuring that they're working with vetted and certified professionals, counteract the shortage in the mortuary science programs because we know that we have less enrolled and even less graduating. We wanted to make sure that we were better serving families' needs. We wanted to make sure that we were being responsive to the fact that funerals are now more involved and requiring more event planning and similar services. They said it would be something that they wanted to look at also was addressing the possible option for small funeral homes that may not be able to hire a full-time licensed funeral director due to it being cost prohibitive. Also relieving front and back office house operations for managers and owners, supplementing the availability of funeral service professionals, enhancing the role of the licensed funeral director because they would be the one overseeing these other paraprofessionals, and then also to prevent burnout and kind of address that work-life balance issue. So that was the list that they said, if we're going to create this ideal position, these are the areas that these positions should address. So once they had determined the what and the why, the next question they had to answer was how, or said another way, what new positions should we consider? And you can see here that there were two positions that the group looked at. They looked at a certified funeral assistant and a certified funeral arranger. And the key word to focus on this slide is the word explored, because I want to focus on the fact, again, that the task force recommendation, as I said earlier, was to form another task force to continue the work that they had started on this topic. The 2020 task force did not recommend creating any specific position or positions. However, they put a lot of time, thought, and discussion towards these two positions that they explored. So I wanted to share this with you, the work that they did, to give us a place for us to further our discussion and kind of a reference point for us to talk about your feedback. So what I'd like to do now is just walk you through the framework for the two positions here that you see that the task force put together. With regard to the certified funeral assistant, the goal or the intention behind that position was that it would be akin to what you see in the dental industry and the legal profession. So you have the dentist has a dental hygienist, the lawyer has a paralegal. I've also been told that it's similar to what happens in the nursing profession as well. So the duties or the structure around this position would be that a certified funeral assistant would have to work under the direct supervision of a licensed funeral director, would only be allowed to be employed by one funeral home at a time. They would be allowed to sign out and transfer a decedent from the place of death and to assist the funeral director with preparation, dressing, and casketing. However, they would not be allowed to transport the decedent to the place of final disposition for the concerns that you can see listed on the screen. They would not be allowed to direct or supervise services, sign or amend death certificates, embalm, or conduct any type of arrangements. That was actually, as we'll talk about, carved out for the certified arranger position. With regard to initial education and requirements and continuing training requirements, the framework that they came away with was an 8 to 12 hour pre-certification training program that would be followed by passing a state recognized exam. The certification that you would ultimately earn would be issued by the state of New York's Department of Health. And just like you all, they would have to recertify every 2 years with the state. The continuing education requirements would be at a biennium like you. They would require OSHA and ethics as part of that. And the proposal or the framework had 4 continuing education credits per biennium for this position. Switching over to the certified arranger position, like the certified assistant, the framework would include direct supervision by a licensed funeral director, only being employed by one funeral home at a time. This individual position, the person in it, would be allowed to make arrangements, collect vital information, coordinate and schedule final disposition, arrange for the care, preparation, and transportation of the decedent, and to discuss and sell merchandise and services. However, only licensed funeral directors would be allowed to sign contracts, sign or amend death certificates, and embalm. So those would not be authorized duties for this position. Looking at the education and training requirements proposed for this position, it was a 20-hour pre-certification training program with at least 25 hands-on arrangements under that funeral director's supervision. Also would have to include an overview of the embalming process. And like the assistant position, you'd have to successfully pass the state recognized exam. You would be certified by the state, 2-year licensing period or certification period. In terms of continuing education credits, topics, and the numbers, that was still to be determined, although they were very clear that they believed ethics should be a required class every 2 years. So that was really the outline that was put together, or the framework for those 2 positions. Again, wanted to share it with you so that you have a foundation to talk off of and to comment on. There was one additional element of data points collected that we want to share with you. I mentioned that the task force provided their recommendations to the board in June of 2019. But as I got to the final stages of their work, they asked for some initial member feedback. So we conducted a survey in May of 2019. We did share this back then, but I thought it would be important to share it again with you now, since it's been a little over a year since we did so. And obviously the results are very directly connected to what we're talking about. So I'll share a couple of the slides and answers with you. This first slide just shows you the total number who answered, which you can see at the top there is 239, as well as the different positions that were held by the folks who answered that survey. With regard to the 239, that is the way we do this is we send out our survey links to the member firms. So we have every year about 950 firms that are members of the state association. So that response rate equates to about a 25% response rate, which if you talk to folks who do surveys, they say that for a survey result to be statistically valid and something you can rely on, you have to have at least a 22% response rate. So I bring that up just so you can have that as a frame of reference as we go through the responses we received. So we asked, again, I said a couple of questions. One was, do the members see that at their funeral home that there was a shortage of qualified funeral directors available for hire? As you can see, just under 44% said yes, just under 30 said no, and a little over a quarter of the respondents did not have a need to hire, so it was kind of a non-applicable answer that they gave for that question. We asked our folks if they were concerned about the future workforce in New York State. You can see that a little over 3/4 of the respondents said they were, about 13% said they weren't, and around 10.5% said they really hadn't given it much thought. Then we asked if they felt that the state association should continue to explore the topic. You can see that just about half said yes, another 40% said no, and that same 10, 11% kind of were undecided, hadn't thought about it. So then we asked about the 2 positions. So we said we didn't give them back in 2019 the same level of detail that I just shared with you, but we did kind of give them a paragraph about generally what each of those positions would be looking at doing. So we asked if they felt we should explore the funeral assistant position further. You can see there about 52% said we should, 37-ish% said we shouldn't, and that same 11% were not sure. We asked the same question about the arranger position. 35% felt we should continue to look at it more. About 55% said we shouldn't. And that same 10%-ish said they weren't sure what we should do. So again, I want to share those results with you so that you could see where our membership stood on some of these questions back in May of 2019. And then one more slide before I open it up to discussion to give you some information about what we're asking about with alcohol in the funeral homes. There has not been nearly the same level of due diligence conducted on this topic. Alcohol in the funeral homes would really be seen as an expansion of the food and beverage law. The way this came up is it was raised during last year's Governmental Affairs Committee meeting, and the context it was brought up in was in the idea of having a champagne toast. The concept was, hey, if a family wanted to do a champagne toast, a Bailey's toast, some type of toast out with alcohol that was near and dear to the decedent, the state law is pretty clear that it's just prohibited. So is that something that we'd want to change to allow for that? But to date, since that meeting last December, there has been no further action taken on this topic and no real other due diligence conducted, which is why we wanted to bring it up with you now, since we had the town halls being conducted. So that's the background / overview on the two areas that we wanted to talk to you about. So as I promised, the balance of our time will be spent for you to share your comments and feedback, to ask your questions. I will now stop talking and I will turn the meeting over to the folks on the line. Again, if you would like to provide a comment, simply unmute your line. There's also a chat box at the bottom. You are welcome to type in a question or a comment and I will read that out to the group. So please, looking forward to hearing from you. Comments, questions, thoughts about either position, the idea of looking at these further in general.
So Mike, I'll just give everybody some information, maybe just to spark some interest. So some background information on alcohol in the funeral home. Currently now 49 of the 50 states allow for basic food and beverage in the funeral home. 46 of the 50 states allow for alcohol consumption in the funeral home, either by specific legislation or when legislation does not currently exist, as long as the funeral home gets the proper licensing and through their local government, layers of government, they're permitted to provide that. So there's some information for alcohol. With regards to the certified funeral assistant, we've all experienced, and some of us still experiencing the pandemic in our areas, and with that came a higher mortality rate, thus more to do, and with the same group of funeral directors. And I'm sure, like many of you, the funeral directors throughout our state worked longer hours, longer days, multiple days, with no end in sight. So if we put the executive order that supported the deputizing of employees to help with transfers, that I guess would kind of coincide with the concept of a certified funeral assistant.
Thank you, Bill. So anybody have thoughts about what we just shared? Do you have what's your feelings on maybe your experience in having, if you deputize somebody, how did that go? Do you see a value in a certified assistant or a ranger in your area? You have concerns about either or both positions and what that might mean? We really are looking for your feedback at this point in time so that we can collect your comments and concerns, that we can bring it back to the board so that they can have a conversation knowing that they have the voice of the members to rely upon as they continue to have conversations about this topic. Again, first step, but important first one. So we're hoping that folks will have some comments and questions or questions they can share with us.
Mike, John Kelly.
Yes, John.
Well, the North Country, of course, is a lot of one-man operations. As a result, there has been interest expressed to me by several funeral homes. And I think it's something that we need to address, both the paralegal positions. The alcohol thing has never been a popular issue up in our area, nor has the food. But I think I was kind of hopeful that some of the funeral homes that were concerned about this issue would be on board today and express their opinions. But that's basically all I have to contribute.
Thank you. Todd? Oh,
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I guess my idea would be, I do agree with a paraprofessional, and I don't like the terminology. I think we discussed it at one of the meetings. I think I do like the idea of a person that can help make removals, and I think that's would be in line with what John was thinking. I guess the idea of food and alcohol too, we haven't had a big call for that in our area per se, especially not alcohol. So I guess it's really a non-issue for us. And I know a lot of funeral homes that would be like for food right now, alcohol might be something that, yes, you can offer that if that be the case, and have to go through the requirements like Bill had mentioned. So I guess I don't have a really strong opinion on that per se, but definitely, I don't know about the legal assistance in the sense of doing arranging things like that. I think that might be coming into some gray area of our licensing, but I do think the removals and things that might be helpful for a lot of folks.
thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else on the line like to share their feelings, thoughts? Well, while you're thinking about maybe those, since we have everybody on the call, I did mention we're going to be doing a COVID call in November, but if anybody has, because we're still getting a lot of questions on things related to COVID, whether it's, services, CE, or getting your pocket cards, any of those types of things, travel advisory, feel free to ask questions on anything that's on your minds, since we're all together. So I'll kind of open it up for even a broader range of comments and questions.
So Mike, I do have a question regarding the executive order that came out starting September 1st with funeral homes having to test for both either COVID and or the flu.
Yeah.
I did reach out to our local or Washington County association or for the public health, and they had mentioned they hadn't heard of this, which I think a lot of folks are in that same boat. However, they did receive a bunch of test kits. Unbeknownst to them, they got a call from UPS or FedEx saying they were going to be delivering test kits because they were in Warren County, and Warren County didn't know they were coming either. So the group decided to call Washington County just to let them know that they were going to be coming that day. So that was somewhat interesting. So I'm not sure if there's any further data or any further instruction from the governor's office as to what they were thinking, how funeral directors they were going to try to test. Our county really didn't know anything about it, like I mentioned, but also that they don't have the whereabouts to test.
Yeah. So we were on a call with the Wadsworth Lab folks, the Department of Health, and the Bureau to talk about what this meant. And this was early when it first came out. We were trying to get everything lined up and explanations, clarified, guidelines presented prior to the flu season. When we were talking with the folks at the lab, we explained to them the circumstances where we thought that the governor was looking for funeral directors to help, and it was very limited to home deaths that were unattended. But we also mentioned that coroners and medical examiners would be involved, and that's another group that you can work with. So they were supposed to go back and talk to them. They were going to circle back with us. I have not heard anything more. So I have been in constant communication with the Department of Health and specifically the Bureau. And together, where the united answer has not changed from what we last put out to the members, which is, unless you have a circumstance where you are supposed to test, then you have no obligation to do anything. Now, that circumstance under the reg is if the attending physician or the primary physician notifies you within 48 hours of death that they suspect COVID and there was no test done, that you're supposed to do this test. Now, just like the county health departments don't know, from our understanding, the doctors have no idea that that's even out there either. So we don't anticipate you guys getting that request from the doctors. If you somehow were to get that request, then the recommendation is to go to the county department and see if they have the test kits and ask them, okay, what's the process supposed to be? If they can't provide the process and get you specifics, then you've taken a reasonable steps at trying to do your due diligence. Besides that, I wouldn't even do it. And we've told the Bureau that, and I've told the Department of Health, that's what I'm going to advise our members, because without clear direction, understanding how this works, liability aspects, cost aspects, are you supposed to pay for the kit? Are they just going to hand it to you? Or the family's going to have some kind of financial obligation? There's too many unknowns and variables right now to put this obligation on you guys. And I told them that's what we were going to say. They understood. They promised to get us information and guidelines, and we haven't gotten anything. So from my standpoint, and I will continue to say this, you have no responsibility unless a physician tells you within 48 hours, and then you go to the Department of Health, your local Department of Health or the coroner, ME, and tell them you just got asked, what am I supposed to do? And if they can't give you just specific direction, you just check the box off. I would try to keep it in writing that you did these things, so you have notes to protect yourselves. But beyond that, I wouldn't do anything else at this point until we have clarification.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep. Melissa, I see your hands raised.
Yes, hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, everybody. We just have a comment about the alcohol and funeral home. Sorry, didn't mean to go back to that. But we found that we have quite a few families who do express interest in it, even outside of like just a toast, just to have like their snacks and their wine or whatever it may be. So I think our interest would lie in what would be required to get that. Like, is it a liquor license? Is it a different type of insurance? Like, what would it entail for the funeral home, and like what type of liability does it put on us? I guess to alter it, right?
Yep.
Yep.
We've been bouncing around it because we have, my home is associated with the funeral home here, and we own an adjacent property. So most recently, the family rented the space at my adjacent property to the funeral home and hosted this cocktail hour after the reception. And we hired bartenders, we hired people to do this. But we have a lot of requests for that. So we're interested to pursue that.
Yeah, so I think it's going to depend on the scope of what ultimately is decided to go forward with. So I think if you're using like a caterer for food now, if you have someone with a liquor license coming in to serve, the question then is, and it's kind of unanswered right now, what kind of permission or license do you guys need in that case versus you're actually serving yourself? Is it transferred by those people and you're just allowing them to come in and do that? Or do you have to have some type of permit or license that the state liquor authority provides to the funeral home itself? From a liability standpoint, insurance standpoint, I'm going to guess that there's going to be some increase or changes to your insurance policy. There may be a higher premium. Are we going to be asked to go to the legislature with some type of limit? So I know that some people had talked about limiting things by amount or type of alcohol being served. Somebody else said, you put it on like as a list. It's like, oh, we're going to have a champagne toast. You're going to offer 30 minutes of wine and cheese and beer, something like that. So I think there's a lot of questions that still need to be answered and details about what the members are looking for that need to be worked out, not just from the legislative perspective, but from the business side. So we're able to kind of give the answers to the questions that you guys are asking. So those questions have been raised, but we just haven't gotten to the level of digging into the materials to get the specific answers yet.
Sure. Great. Thanks.
Melissa, some of the dialogue that we've had with our colleagues across the state, spoke about, having the bottled beer, bottled wine, bottled champagne, not looking to open up a bar, right? Not looking to have, open bar, but to have that as a complement to the existing food and beverage. So something, that's befitting and that goes alongside what we're doing now, just that next level. So thanks for your interest. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Anyone else? Any other comments, questions, feedback? All right. I'm not going to make you guys sit here for 25 more minutes in silence if you don't have any other questions or comments. So I will say this too. I've said this to everybody else that we've had with the town hall so far. If you think of something after we're off our town hall, please share them with us. This is, again, as I mentioned, just the first step in reaching out to the members to tell you about what has been worked on, where we are, and to get that feedback. So please email me if you have any comments or questions, or you just want to share what you feel about both or either of these topics. And my email address, for those who don't know it, is pretty straightforward and simple. It's mike@nysfda.org. So please feel free to reach out to me at any time and provide that feedback. Anything we get prior to the December board meetings, we will incorporate into the consolidated feedback that we give the board for them to take a look at. So I will do one more around a call out for any additional comments or questions. All right, well, hearing no others, I want to just thank you all for being part of today's call. And before we sign off, I'll just turn it back to Bill for some closing remarks.
Mike, thank you very much. And again,
Bill, you're muted.
apologize. So again, Mike, thank you very much for the presentation and bringing that information to everybody. Thank you to everyone for attending the virtual town hall. It is only through the collaboration of our colleagues throughout New York State that we will ensure we have the best possible outcomes. For us, it's about always protecting our license, but also supporting our profession and what we do and how we deliver services to our client families throughout the state that are equally important. Once again, a thank you to our sponsors. We've been very lucky to have great sponsors that support our mission and that is always willing to help us. And through those sponsors, they've underwritten these virtual town halls for us. Again, if there's any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to any of the members of the executive board or Mike Linati with any questions that you may have. And once again, thank you to everybody who attended. I wish everybody a very safe day. Stay safe, keep your family and your communities healthy. And again, I thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.